Clean genetic record. No sexual history. Exceptional. The words echoed through the cold room, making the three women across from her exchange a small, satisfied laugh like they'd just witnessed a rare commodity. 6 hours earlier, Aaliyah had been standing hunched at a bus stop in the suburbs, unaware she was about to be priced by her own body. An October wind swept across the cracked pavement, pulling at her natural curls as if to remind her winter was coming early. She tucked her chin into her thin coat, one hand clutching her mother's medical file, the other holding a cream-colored invitation. Embossed in the top right corner, Hawthorne Medical Brokerage, private invitation. Her mother was in the hospital with severe diabetes complications, bills stacking high enough to bury the small house her father had left behind. The part-time bookstore job barely kept the lights on. So when she heard of a premium medical opportunity, enough to clear all hospital debt instantly, Aaliyah read the fine print. The Hawthorne estate was unlike anything she had ever seen. Through the black iron gates, two tall elms stood like green walls leading to a gray stone mansion. The man who opened the door didn't speak. He simply handed her a silver nameplate. The interview room was long and narrow, the ceiling high, a crystal chandelier casting a cold gleam over a walnut table. 4 chairs in a row, sonainuan, sonimweed. 3 white women, sleek dresses, pointed heels already seated, trading swift glances as she walked in. The man in the gray suit flipped through each file, his voice flat, Miss Caldwell athletic record. Miss Lane Ivy League. Then he reached hers, paused, and read the line that had just stripped her bare in front of strangers. One of the women covered her mouth with her hand as if sharing a private joke. Heat rose in Aaliyah's cheeks, her ears burned. She laced her fingers tightly to keep them from shaking. At the head of the table, a silver-haired woman, likely Mrs. Hawthorne leaned forward, her tone low but needle-sharp. "We choose the vessel carefully. You are exactly what we need." The word vessel slid down Aaliyah's spine like a sheet of ice. Before her lay a thick contract, the paper crisp and white. Beside it, a freshly sharpened yellow pencil. She noticed her name wasn't printed, only a blank space waiting to be filled. Somewhere in the silence, she heard the grandfather clock tick, each beat like a countdown. Aaliyah signed. The graphite pressed dark into the paper bold, but easy to erase. In the far corner, a tiny red light blinked. Not from any chandelier, from a hidden camera. The red light in the corner seemed to burn into her peripheral vision long after she left the room. Now it was behind her along with the heavy walnut door that closed without a sound, like the house was swallowing her whole. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with oil paintings of unsmiling men and women in stiff Victorian poses. Their eyes followed her too precisely to be coincidence. She adjusted the silver nameplate still clipped to her coat, its metal cold against her chest. Her footsteps softened against a Persian runner rug, but somewhere above, a faint creak of floorboards kept pace. The air was perfumed not with flowers, but with a layered mix of candle wax, furniture polish, and something sterile, like a hospital corridor hiding in luxury. At the curve of the hall, a figure emerged, the elderly butler she'd glimpsed at the gate. His suit was immaculate, his posture upright, but his gaze lingered, memorizing before he stepped aside without a word. Aaliyah offered a polite nod, forcing her lips into a faint smile. No reaction. The only sound was the subtle click of her heels and the steady tick of the long case clock at the hall's end. Through a set of arched French doors, the main living space opened like a museum, cream marble floors veined with silver, carved crown moldings. High windows shuttered just enough to let in filtered light. Every chair, every vase, every book on the shelves felt staged, untouched. Aaliyah's breath caught when she noticed a camera half concealed in the curve of a plaster cherub's arm near the ceiling. The lens was small, but the glint was unmistakable. She realized she was holding her invitation envelope like a shield, the paper already warm from her grip. A door on the opposite side opened. A woman in a navy dress entered, her steps measured, gaze cool. Without introducing herself, she gestured toward a side corridor. "Follow me," the woman said, voice smooth but without warmth. As they walked, Aaliyah passed a gilt mirror tall enough to reflect them head to toe. She caught her own reflection beside the stranger's, and for the first time noticed how out of place she looked in her thrift store coat. Halfway down the corridor, the woman stopped before a carved double door, pressing her palm flat against it until it swung open. "Mrs. Surrogate, Hawthorne is expecting you." The doors closed behind her with a muffled thud, sealing Aaliyah inside a room so still it seemed to be holding its breath. Mrs. Hawthorne sat at the far end, framed by a wall of leaded glass windows. The light behind her flattened every detail except the gleam of a single pearl at her throat. In front of her, a small porcelain teacup, steam curling upward in perfect spirals. Aaliyah took one cautious step forward, the soft carpet swallowing the sound. "Stop there!" The command was calm, but it cut through the room like a wire. "Mrs. Hawthorne set the cup down with delicate precision, her gaze never leaving Aaliyah's face. "You may think you understand the arrangement," she said, folding her hands over one another. "You don't." Aaliyah kept her chin level. "I signed the contract." Mrs. Hawthorne's smile was a brief, controlled thing. "You signed our contract. You will live here. You will follow our schedule. You will speak only when spoken to. And above all," her eyes narrowed, "you will remember what you are in this house." The pause that followed was deliberate. "Heavier and not heavy." "A vessel," she finished, letting the word hang. The air felt heavier, the scent of her tea suddenly sharp in Aaliyah's nose. She shifted her weight, unsure if it was from discomfort or the instinct to run. "Mrs." Hawthorne reached for a small silver bell and rang it once. The chime was soft, but the door opened almost instantly. The woman in the navy dress reappeared, expression unchanged. "Show her to the East Wing, Mrs. Hawthorne said, eyes still locked on Aaliyah, "and see that she's reminded of the rules." As Aaliyah turned to leave, "Mrs. Hawthorne's voice followed her, lower now but more dangerous for it. "If you break them, you won't be asked to leave. You'll simply be removed." The woman in navy placed a hand lightly on Aaliyah's elbow, steering her back into the corridor. Her grip wasn't tight, but her nails pressed just enough to leave a trace. They walked in silence toward the East Wing. Somewhere behind them, the silver bell chimed again. The East Wing hallway was dimmer, the windows shuttered so tightly that daylight only seeped through in thin, pale lines. The carpet was thicker here, swallowing the sound of their steps, but the silence wasn't empty. It pulsed with the faint hum of something mechanical, like hidden wiring behind the walls. The woman in navy didn't speak until they reached a brass-framed door. She opened it with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside was a modest bedroom, neatly made bed, small writing desk, an armoire. The air smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. "This is yours," she said. "Everything you need is already here. Everything you don't need has been removed." From her coat pocket, she drew a thin, cream-colored booklet and placed it on the desk. House Rules was embossed in gold lettering. Aaliyah flipped it open. The first page read, "Wake at 6:00 a.m. sharp. Meals at designated times in designated rooms. No personal electronics. Random medical checks to be attended without delay. No conversation with male family members without a witness present." She looked up. "Is this legal?" The woman's gaze didn't waver. "It is here." That night, Aaliyah learned just how closely they meant to keep her in line. At dinner, she was late by 2 minutes, caught standing in the garden just beyond the side terrace, watching the sun sink behind the tree line. The next moment, a blinding floodlight flared on her. A man in a gray uniform stepped from the shadows, clipboard in hand. "Not your hour to be here," he said. His voice was flat, but his pen scratched something onto the paper with mechanical speed. When she returned inside, the woman in navy was waiting. "Second warning," she murmured. Aaliyah froze. "Second." The woman didn't answer. She simply walked away, the sound of her heels clicking in perfect rhythm until it vanished at the far end of the hall. A chill settled into Aaliyah's bones, not from the night air, but from the realization that she had no idea what counted as her first warning. And then, from somewhere above, came the creak of a floorboard, the same slow, deliberate pace she'd heard her first day here. The creak above her head stopped as suddenly as it began, replaced by the low murmur of voices drifting down the staircase. Aaliyah followed the sound into the main dining hall, the light from a crystal chandelier spilling across the polished floor. Dinner had already begun. At the long mahogany table, the family sat in their appointed places, Mrs. Hawthorne at the head, others spaced evenly like pieces on a chessboard. A seat near the far end had been left for her. She slid into it quietly, lowering her gaze. But when she looked up, Edward Hawthorne was already watching her. He wasn't seated beside her, at least not yet. He excused himself from midway down the table, wine glass in hand, and walked to the empty chair on her right. "Your first week here," he said, settling in. "Adjusting well." His tone was light, but his eyes stayed on hers a moment too long. She nodded once, focusing on the soup before her. Edward leaned closer, his voice dipping lower. "What did they promise you?" She blinked. What? "Everyone has their price," he said, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Just wondering if they met yours." The faint clink of silverware at the far end of the table felt too far away to reach her. She became acutely aware of the camera perched above the mantel, its lens angled toward their end of the table. "Mrs. Hawthorne's voice cut across the space. "Edward." He didn't look away from Aaliyah. "Yes, Barm." "Yes, mother." Her eyes narrowed. "Eat." Edward's smile didn't fade. He picked up his spoon, but even as he sipped, his gaze returned to her, steady, unblinking. It was not the look of a man making small talk. By the time dessert arrived, Aaliyah could feel the weight of it pressing on her. When the plates were cleared, Edward stood, setting his glass down with a precise click. "Walk with me," he said quietly. It wasn't a request. She hesitated, glancing toward Mrs. Hawthorne, but the older woman was speaking to someone else now, her profile to them. Edward took a step toward the side door, holding it open just enough for her to pass. The hallway beyond was unlit. Have you ever stepped into a place you knew you shouldn't, but curiosity pulled you in anyway? If this moment has your heart racing, tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's waiting in the dark. The door clicked shut behind them, and the sudden absence of dining room chatter made the darkness feel heavier. Edward's steps echoed ahead, slow and deliberate, guiding her toward a faint light bleeding from beneath another door. He stopped without turning. "I need to check something in the infirmary," he said casually, as if they were discussing the weather. "Come on." She hesitated at the threshold, but the smell of antiseptic and faint hum of refrigeration units pulled her forward. The room was all stainless steel counters and white cabinets, the kind of sterile that belonged in a hospital, not a home. Edward crossed to a wall-mounted cabinet, rifling through a drawer without looking at her. "Wait here." He disappeared through a side door, leaving it ajar just enough for her to glimpse rows of medical supplies beyond. Alone now, Aaliyah's gaze swept the room. In the corner, a bin labeled "Confidential Waste" sat half full. A torn sheet of paper peeked over the edge, a corner marked with the hospital's crest. Her pulse quickened. She stepped closer, listening for Edward's return. The hallway beyond the side door stayed quiet. She reached into the bin, fingertips brushing the crumpled edges. As she pulled it free, she smoothed it enough to read the jagged black text, "Paternity inconclusive." The words blurred for a moment as her heart pounded in her ears. She scanned the rest of the torn form dates, test codes, a patient ID she didn't recognize. The other half of the page was missing, as if someone had ripped it away in haste. She folded the scrap, sliding it into the inner pocket of her coat. Her eyes flicked toward the security camera in the upper corner, its small red light steady, unblinking. A shadow shifted in the side doorway. Aaliyah Edwards' voice was smooth, but there was an edge in it now. She turned slowly, masking the paper with her palm inside the pocket. "You said to wait." His eyes lingered on her a beat too long before he smiled. "Good." He stepped back into the room, letting the side door swing shut behind him. From somewhere inside her coat, the folded scrap felt like it was burning through the fabric. They left the infirmary without another word. Edward's footsteps faded in the opposite direction, leaving her alone in the East Wing corridor. She touched the inside of her coat where the folded scrap rested, its edges pressing into her skin with every step. Her assigned room was dark when she entered, the only light coming from the narrow slit between the heavy curtains. She shut the door, leaned back against it, and exhaled slow, shaky. The silence didn't last. A faint buzz rattled from deep inside the armoire. Her pulse spiked. She crossed the room in 2 quick strides and opened the doors. On the lowest shelf, beneath neatly folded sweaters she hadn't packed herself, sat a cheap black flip phone. She didn't remember seeing it before. It buzzed again, screen lighting up with an unknown number. She flipped it open with trembling fingers. One new message. They lied about the baby. The words stabbed through her haze of adrenaline. She read them twice, 3 times. Her gaze darted to the door, then to the curtained window. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She tapped the phone's menu, looking for the sender's name, but the log was empty, no saved contacts, no history before this message. She typed back, "Who is this?" A pause, then another buzz. "Not safe here. Don't trust them. Hide what you found." Her breath caught. The only thing she'd found tonight was the torn test result. Whoever this was, they knew. The hallway outside groaned under the weight of a slow, deliberate footstep. And then they warned. Then another. She snapped the phone shut, slid it under her pillow, and slipped off her coat, keeping the scrap of paper inside the lining. A soft knock at the door. "Aliyah." The voice was female, smooth, polite. The woman in the navy dress. "Dinner's over. Mrs. Hawthorne wants to see you." Her fingers tightened on the coat's hem. The next morning, the east wing window rattled with the wind, but the chill in Aliyah's bones came from somewhere else. She dressed quickly, tucking the torn test result deeper into the coat lining. At breakfast, Mrs. Hawthorne's chair was empty. Edward wasn't there either. The woman in navy poured her coffee without meeting her eyes and said only, "You have 1 hour before your next check." 1 hour was enough. She slipped out through the side terrace where she'd been warned before. The garden hedges curved toward the estate's iron gates, and beyond them, the town's narrow street. She walked fast, keeping her head down until the marble and manicured lawns gave way to cracked pavement and brick storefronts. The marketplace smelled of baked bread and damp stone. She scanned the stalls until she saw a face she half recognized, a woman with hair pulled into a tight bun, arranging loaves behind a small cart. Aliyah approached slowly. "You worked for the Hawthorns," she said, low enough to be drowned by the market noise. The woman froze, her hands tightening around a paper bag. "You shouldn't say their name here. I just have questions." "Na uwam fernanten, wuli diu." The woman's eyes flicked over Aliyah's shoulder, scanning for shadows. "No questions. No talking. I left for a reason." Aliyah stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I think they're lying about a child. And I think you know why." The woman's breath hitched. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a trembling hand, she pushed the paper bag toward Aliyah. "Walk away." Inside, beneath a loaf still warm from the oven, was a folded sheet of newsprint. The headline, yellowed and grainy, "Local heir cleared of assault charges." The photo was unmistakable, Edward, years younger, flanked by lawyers. The article detailed accusations from a young woman who'd vanished after signing a confidential settlement. No charges filed. No trial till Nyashimrayuri. When Aliyah looked up, the bun-haired woman was gone. Behind her, the street seemed suddenly quieter, as if the market's hum had been turned down. She folded the paper, tucking it into the same lining that hid the test result. From somewhere near the gate, a dark sedan rolled past slowly, its tinted window gliding down just enough for her to see the glint of a silver ring. The sedan turned the corner and vanished, but the echo of its slow engine seemed to follow her all the way back toward the estate. Each step felt heavier, her mind replaying the headline in her pocket and the torn test results stitched into her coat lining. By the time she reached the side terrace, the air smelled of rain. The woman in navy stood waiting, hands clasped, expression unreadable. "Mrs. Hawthorne wants you in the study." The study was dim except for a lamp casting a warm circle on the desk. Mrs. Hawthorne sat behind it, fingertips resting on a closed leather folder. "You've met someone in town," she said. Not a question. Aliyah's throat tightened. "I went for a walk." Mrs. Hawthorne opened the folder. Inside, photographs, grainy shots of Aliyah at the marketplace, leaning toward the bun-haired woman, the paper bag in her hands, You think you understand why you're here, Mrs. Hawthorne said, voice low. You don't? This family has endured unfortunate rumors. We need a child that cannot be questioned. One whose bloodline is unblemished. Her eyes locked onto Aaliyah's. Your genetic profile is ideal. Clean, untouched by scandal. You are here to rewrite a story that has haunted us for years. Aaliyah's stomach turned. You mean hide it? Mrs. Hawthorne's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. Protect it. And in return, we protect you. The world outside these walls is not kind to young women with secrets. She closed the folder with a soft snap and slid it aside. You will give this family what it needs, and in doing so, secure your own future. Do you understand? Aaliyah's hands curled into fists at her sides. And if I don't, Mrs. Sunderwatten. Hawthorne leaned back, her pearl necklace catching the lamplight. Then you'll discover how easily a person can disappear without leaving the faintest ripple. The rain began to patter against the windows, the sound filling the silence between them. Mrs. Hawthorne reached for the silver bell on her desk and rang it once. The butler appeared almost instantly, as if waiting just outside. See that she's escorted back, Mrs. Hawthorne said, and remind her no more walks without permission. As Aaliyah stepped into the hallway, she could still feel the weight of Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze on her back like a hook lodged deep, pulling her towards something she had no intention of giving. The butler's footsteps followed her all the way back to the east wing, a steady, measured beat that never closed in and never fell behind. When she reached her door, he handed her the key without meeting her eyes, then walked away without a word. She locked it. But the idea of staying in that room with the rain tapping at the windows and Mrs. Hawthorne's words still echoing made her chest tighten. She slid the torn paternity result and the folded newspaper onto her desk. Two fragments of a story and no way to prove they were connected. Not yet. Her gaze drifted to the leather-bound house rules booklet. Rule 4, random medical checks to be attended without delay. If the family kept their medical files in the infirmary, there had to be other records that weren't meant for her eyes. She waited until the hallway was quiet, then slipped out barefoot to muffle her steps. The estate at night felt different, the chandeliers dimmed, portraits watching her in the half-light, the low hum of unseen machines filling the silence. The library door loomed at the end of a side corridor. She'd only passed it once before, but she remembered the heavy brass handle and the faint scent of old paper seeping from the crack beneath. Inside, the air was warmer, dustier. Rows of shelves stood like sentries, and at the far end, a locked glass cabinet glinted in the lamplight. She tried the handle. Her eyes scanned the nearby desk, an old oak surface scattered with envelopes, a blotter, and a tarnished key resting as if forgotten. It fit the cabinet perfectly. The doors opened with a faint click, revealing a neat stack of labeled folders. Her fingers skimmed over names she didn't recognize until one stopped her cold. Hawthorne, private, paternity tests. She slid it out, heart pounding, and flipped it open. Halfway down the first page, she froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, in the hallway outside. The sound stopped right outside the library door. A shadow crossed the gap beneath it. The shadow lingered for a breath, then moved on. Aaliyah's grip on the folder eased just enough for her to slide it back into place. She closed the cabinet, locked it, and replaced the key on the desk exactly as she'd found it. She eased toward the far side of the library, where a narrow servant's passage led to the main hall. The walls here were closer, the air cooler, carrying sound like a whisper against her skin. She stopped when voices drifted up from the landing below. Hannah, we can't risk it. Edward! Mrs. Hawthorne's voice controlled but sharpened by anger. Edward's reply was lower, almost too quiet to catch. Then you should have chosen someone else. A pause, then Mrs. Hawthorne again, colder now. Her file is clean. That's the only thing that matters. Everything else, your doubts, your preferences are irrelevant. Preferences. Aaliyah pressed herself against the wall, the wood grain digging into her shoulder. Edward's tone shifted, no longer soft. You think I don't see it, that you're using her to erase his name from the family record? Even if. Enough, Mrs. Hawthorne cut in. The sound of glass against wood, as if she'd set down a drink too hard. We will control the narrative. Oh, we always have. Footsteps crossed the hall below, heavier than the butler's measured stride. She's just a vessel, Edward. Remember that. Silence stretched. Then Edward's voice came again, quieter but edged with something unreadable. You might be surprised how much a vessel can hold before it breaks. The scrape of a chair, then both sets of footsteps moved away in opposite directions. Aaliyah stayed frozen until the air felt empty again. Her mind was already running misses. Hawthorne's obsession with a clean profile, Edward's mention of someone else's name being erased, the unmistakable crack in their united front. She backed away from the servants' passage, heart hammering, every sense heightened. If they were already at odds about her, it meant one thing. Whatever leverage she had to find it fast before they decided she was no longer worth the trouble. A faint creak behind her snapped her head around. She wasn't alone in the library anymore. The air shifted before she heard the step, a faint disturbance in the stillness, like a door had opened just enough to let the night slip in. She turned. The butler stood half in shadow near the library's side entrance, his posture straight, hands clasped loosely behind his back. In the dim light, the lines in his face seemed deeper, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I know what you were doing. He stepped forward until the scent of his cologne faint. Woody reached her. And I know what you found. Her fingers curled into her palms. Do you? His gaze didn't waver. Enough to tell you this, stop digging. If you want to leave this house alive, you will follow the rules and keep your eyes down. There was no threat in his tone, but something in his stillness made the words heavier. Why warn me at all, she asked. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face, fear, quickly buried. He leaned in just enough for her to hear the next sentence, without the walls hearing it too. Because I've seen what happens when someone doesn't. He straightened, the mask sliding back over his features. They will be looking for you now. Return to your room. He moved toward the main door, his steps slow, deliberate. Before stepping out, he paused in the doorway. And Aaliyah, if you think the Hawthorns fear the truth, you're wrong. They fear losing control of it. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving her alone among the shelves. The silence was so complete she could hear her own pulse in her ears. Then a faint hum. It was coming from her coat pocket. She reached inside. The burner phone. Its screen lit up in the dark, casting a pale glow over her hands. One new message, you're running out of time. The words on the burner phone screen seemed to pulse in the dark. You're running out of time. Her thumb hovered over the keypad, but before she could type, a soft patter of footsteps in the hall made her snap it shut. She slipped it back into her coat pocket, grabbed the house rules booklet from the desk, and walked out as if she belonged there. She didn't go to her room. Instead, she veered toward the west wing where the family's private rooms were. The corridor was darker, the wall sconces dimmed to a faint amber glow. Every few steps, she paused to listen, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She knew Mr. Hawthorne kept an office here. She'd seen him retreat to it after dinners, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. If she could get something of his, a hair, anything, she could send it to someone she trusted outside. The office door was ajar, just enough to spill a thin slice of lamplight into the hall. She pushed it open, wincing as the hinge gave a faint groan. Inside, the room smelled of leather and smoke. Books lined the walls, and behind the desk sat a high-backed chair upholstered in dark brown hide. A crystal glass with amber residue rested on a coaster, beside an open ledger. She circled to the back of the chair, eyes scanning for anything she could take without notice. And there, clinging to the stitched seam of the headrest, a short, silvery strand. Her fingers shook as she plucked it free, holding it up to the lamplight to be sure. Definitely his. She slipped it into a small envelope she'd folded from scrap paper in her coat pocket. Now she just needed to get it out. Back in the hall, she retraced her steps to the east wing, stopping at the service exit near the laundry. The air here was damp, smelling faintly of soap. She dropped the envelope into a padded mailer she'd hidden days ago, addressed to a friend she trusted more than anyone. The low rumble of a voice froze her in place, Or check the east wing first. Footsteps. Coming closer. If you were in her place right now, heart pounding, proof in your pocket, and nowhere to run, what would you do? Share your answer in the comments. And subscribe so you'll be here when the truth finally breaks loose. She pressed herself into the narrow gap between the laundry shelves, holding her breath as the footsteps drew nearer. Two male voices, low and purposeful, passed within arm's reach. One of them rattled the service door handle. Locked. They moved on. Only when their echoes faded did she slip out, crossing the dim corridor and back into the main hall. Her heart still hammered, but the small weight of the mailer now gone from her pocket gave her a flicker of relief. The hair was on its way. By the time evening fell, the estate had transformed. The dining room was set for a formal gathering, a white linen cloth that gleamed under chandelier light. Crystal glasses arranged in perfect symmetry, silver cutlery polished to a mirror finish. Alia was placed 2 seats down from Mrs. Hawthorne, with Edward directly across from her. He looked unreadable tonight, his gaze flicking to her and away as servants glided between the chairs with bottles of wine and trays of hors d'oeuvres. She kept her head down, her mind on the mailer. She'd told her friend to rush the test and text her the result the moment it came in. But each polite laugh around the table, each toast raised in the Hawthorne name, stretched the hours like rope. Halfway through the main course, her pocket buzzed. Once the sound was soft, but to her it was deafening. She slipped a hand under the table, flipping open the burner phone. One message, one photo attachment. The lab report. She scanned the words, her breath catching halfway down the page. Paternity positive match John Hawthorne Sr. Her pulse roared in her ears. The child was his, not Edward's brother, not anyone they'd named in public. The patriarch himself. The chandelier's light seemed suddenly too bright, the air too heavy. Across the table, Edward raised his glass in a toast to a couple she didn't know, but his eyes locked on hers as he drank. Her fingers tightened around the phone until they ached. She could feel the decision pressing down on her, confront them now, in front of every guest, or wait, and risk the story being buried forever. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice cut through the clink of cutlery. Alia, you've been so quiet tonight. Every head turned toward her. She rose from her chair. Every eye in the room followed her as she pushed her chair back, the scrape of wood on marble loud enough to silence the murmured conversations. Alia set her napkin down, smoothing it with deliberate care before speaking. You want to know why I've been quiet? Her voice was steady, but her fingers around the burner phone felt like they were holding a live wire. Mrs. Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, lips curved in a faint, expectant smile. Enlighten us. Alia placed the phone on the table, screen facing up, and slid it forward until it rested in the golden glow of the chandelier. The results came in. A ripple of confusion passed down the table. Edward straightened, his wine glass pausing midair. Results misses. Hawthorne's tone sharpened. DNA. Alia's eyes swept the length of the table. And they prove the baby's father isn't who you've told everyone it is. The room held its breath. She tapped the phone. The screen lit up. The words bold and undeniable, paternity positive match John Hawthorne Sr. Gasps scattered like breaking glass. Edward's face drained of color. Mrs. Hawthorne's hand gripped her wine stem so tightly her knuckles blanched. At the far end, John Hawthorne Sr. didn't move. His gaze met hers, calm as still water, but in it, something dark shifted. A guest coughed awkwardly, the sound cracking the silence. The violinist in the corner had stopped playing, bow frozen midair. Edward was the first to speak. You're lying, but his voice lacked conviction. Lies don't come with lab reports, Alia said, her tone cutting through the room like a blade. Mrs. Hawthorne's glass slammed onto the table, red wine spilling across the linen like a spreading wound. You have no idea what you've done. Oh, I do, Alia replied, her chin lifting. I've made sure the truth doesn't stay buried under marble floors and family portraits. John Hawthorne Sr. finally moved, setting his utensils down with a precise clink. Enough, he said, voice low but carrying. His eyes flicked to the staff hovering at the edges of the room. The butler stepped forward. For a heartbeat, Aaliyah thought he might be coming to her side. Instead, his hand went to the back of her chair, firm, unyielding. "Escort her upstairs," the patriarch said. The butler's grip tightened on her chair, but Aaliyah didn't resist. Not because she was afraid, because she could see the panic flickering at the edges of Mrs. Hawthorne's control, and she knew it was already too late to contain this. They marched her upstairs, the dining room murmurs swelling into a low storm behind her. She kept her head high, letting the butler close the door to her room without locking it. She didn't need to fight to get out. The story was already leaving the estate. The burner phone buzzed in her hand. She flipped it open to see a message from her friend, sent the report to every major outlet. "Brace yourself." Downstairs, a door slammed. "Menace, sir." Then another. Voices rose, sharper now, carrying through the high ceilings. By morning, the estate gates were surrounded. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes angled at the sky like impatient fingers. Camera lenses peeked through the wrought iron, flashes popping every time a servant crossed the drive. Aaliyah stood at her bedroom window, watching the swarm. Reporters called her name, shouting questions over one another. "Is it true about the paternity? Did they pay you to keep quiet? Are you safe?" In the courtyard, Edward stormed past the fountain, his face pale under the morning light. Behind him, Mrs. Hawthorne emerged in a tailored gray suit, her pearl necklace now a hard line against her throat. She stopped just short of the gate, flanked by two lawyers. A dozen microphones thrust forward. "No comment," she said, voice steady but eyes narrowed. "This is a private family matter." But the world had already decided it wasn't. Headlines rolled across phone screens faster than she could read them. Hawthorne dynasty rocked by paternity scandal. DNA reveals patriarch at center of surrogate controversy. Her own lawyer arrived by mid-morning, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit who walked into the East Wing like she owned it. "They'll try to spin it," she told Aaliyah, closing the door behind them. "But the contract they had, you sign illegal under state law? We'll hit them on both fronts, public and legal." Aaliyah glanced back at the window, at the crowd waiting beyond the gates. For the first time since stepping into the Hawthorne house, she wasn't the one being watched. She was the one holding the spotlight. And she had no intention of letting it go. 2 weeks later, the estate's stone facade was replaced by the sharp lines of a courthouse. The air outside buzzed with the same press corps that had swarmed the gates, their lenses now trained on a single set of double doors. Inside, the atmosphere was colder. Rows of polished benches, the smell of old wood and ink, and a ceiling so high it made voices echo like accusations. Aaliyah sat beside her lawyer at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Mrs. Hawthorne's legal team formed a wall of gray suits and binders, with Edward at the end, his jaw set like carved stone. The patriarch wasn't present, whether by choice or design. She couldn't tell. The judge, a stern woman with steel-rimmed glasses, adjusted her papers. "This is a hearing to determine custody of the minor child carried by Miss Aaliyah Johnson under contract with the Hawthorne family." Mrs. Hawthorne's lead attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my client entered into this agreement in good faith. The child's welfare is paramount, and it is in the child's best interest to remain in the stability and resources of the Hawthorne household." Aaliyah's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, the agreement was signed under conditions that violate state surrogacy laws. Furthermore, the genetic father is not the individual named in the contract, but the patriarch of the Hawthorne family, a fact concealed from my client until she obtained independent testing." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Mrs. Hawthorne's lawyer countered, "Irrelevant." "The contract is void," Aaliyah's lawyer cut in, her voice sharp enough to still the room. "My client was misled, monitored, and controlled in a manner that endangered her autonomy and safety. We submit not only for custody, but for a protective order against further contact from the Hawthornes." Edward leaned forward, whispering something to his attorney. Mrs. Herrera. Hawthorne's gaze stayed locked on Aaliyah, unreadable but unyielding. The judge's gavel tapped once. "I've reviewed the evidence, including the DNA report and the terms of the contract. This court finds the agreement unenforceable under state law. Custody is awarded to Ms. Johnson, 1AW101 Macon. The Hawthornes are to have no contact with her or the child without court approval." For a second, the words didn't register. Then they sank in, slow and heavy. Alia exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in months. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, murmuring, "You did it." Across the aisle, Mrs. Hawthorne's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened around her pearls until the strands strained against her throat. Alia stood, the weight of the courtroom's stairs following her out into the bright afternoon light. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. She didn't stop walking. The victory was hers at least for now. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp with the smell of rain on hot pavement. Elia adjusted the blanket around the small bundle in her arms, the baby's breathing soft against her collarbone. Cameras flashed. Questions flew, but they were just noise now distant, muted. She descended the courthouse steps slowly, her lawyer just behind her, guiding her through the press line toward a waiting car. The crowd parted, but the voices didn't stop. How does it feel to win? Are you afraid of retaliation? Will you disappear now? She didn't answer. Inside the car, the city passed in a blur of lights and glass. For the first time in months, the walls around her weren't marble, and the windows weren't locked from the outside. She loosened her hold on the baby just enough to see his face calm, unaware of the storm he'd been born into. They stopped at a red light. That's when she saw it. Across the intersection, a black limousine idled at the curb. Its windows were tinted so dark they reflected the streetlights like pools of ink. But as her gaze lingered, the rear window slid down just an inch enough to reveal the glint of a silver ring. Her breath caught. The same ring she'd seen from the market weeks ago. The light turned green, and the limo melted into traffic, gone before she could say a word. Her lawyer noticed her expression. "What is it?" "Nothing," Aaliyah lied, though her pulse said otherwise. She turned her eyes back to the baby, pressing her lips to his temple. The victory was real, but so was the shadow still following them. Somewhere out there, in a world of shuttered windows and locked rooms, the Hawthorns were watching, waiting, and she knew this fight was only the first round. This is what it means to walk away with the truth in your hands and the enemy still at your back. If you believe stories like Aaliyah's should be told until the world can't ignore them, stand with us. Subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, leave a comment with the words "Justice Matters," and share this story so the next voice fighting to be heard knows they're not alone. Because the shadows don't sleep, and neither do we,